news conference after shots were fired outside the White House, prompting Secret Service to clear the grounds. The president returned a few minutes later.
It seems that the person was shot by Secret Service. So we'll see what happens. And
congressional and White House negotiators continued blaming each other for collapsed talks.
Democrats said, our way or the highway.
Rather than compromise, Republican counterparts said take a hike.
In the meantime, the president vowed to act alone, signing 4 executive measures over the weekend.
My administration will provide immediate and vital relief to Americans struggling.
Not exactly. President Trump plans to postpone payroll taxes through the end of the year for workers making less than $100,000, but they'll owe the money later unless Congress acts. The president claimed he will prevent evictions, but has only directed federal agencies to consider whether halting evictions is necessary, and said he will extend federal unemployment benefits, though cutting them from $600 to $400 a week. Plus, 25% would have to be funded by cash-strapped states. Nebraska Republican Ben Sasse called Mr. Trump's plan unconstitutional slop, and even the president acknowledged legal challenges are likely.
The Constitution gives the lawmaking and spending baton to Congress. Here we have the president trying to take the lawmaking baton, arguably trying to take the spending baton away from Congress.
Rija Jang, CBS News, the White House.
Tonight, a frantic.
And they're all waiting to see the election. And if we have a win on November 3rd, we will have a deal with, in my opinion, Iran within 1 month. And I don't know that we want to have a deal with China, to be honest with you. So I'm saying to myself, gee, but China wants us to lose very badly. And you know who else is not happy with us winning? Russia. The phony people that tell the story, the fake news stories about Russia. It was just reported, the numbers. I raised $400 billion extra in NATO. You know that. It went from 130 to $400 billion. And that.
When can I get my own car?
Florida School District, the earliest that classrooms would reopen for in-person learning is October. David?
All right, Victor Akendo on the schools tonight. Victor, thank you. And we talked to this country's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, late this afternoon. We asked him about the children in this country, nearly 100,000 of them testing positive in just the last 2 weeks of July. And we asked him about the images from some schools already, the crowded hallways, many students without masks. And Dr. Fauci made it clear to me that he thinks there should be universal mask wearing in American schools. Dr. Fauci, thanks for joining us here. And I want to start off with the news. We saw these new numbers today, increases in hospitalizations in 20 states, increases in daily deaths in 25 states. And I'm sure you're aware of this new study from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Nearly 100,000 children have tested positive for coronavirus in just the last 2 weeks. And this, of course, comes just as many schools across this country prepare to reopen. Do you feel comfortable with much of the country sending children back to school?
You know, it's really a mixed bag in some respects, David, because we live in a pretty large country that have differences in different parts of the country. I think as a default position, we should try to the best of our ability to get the children back to school for the reasons that we're familiar with, negative consequences psychologically and otherwise on kids, as well as the spin-off type of a downstream ripple effects on families about getting kids back to work. Having said that, as a default principle, which we should try to do, there's a however there. But the however is that we've always got to make our primary consideration the health, the safety, and the welfare of the children and of the teachers. Now, having said that, if you look at the country, there are parts of the country where the level of infection is really quite low and has been maintained as quite low. Under those circumstances, I think you can't compare them to other parts of the country.
I know what you said there, Dr. Fauci, that we have to take a look at one region at a time, but one thing we can do is look at the schools that have tried to open already, and you've seen those images out of that high school in Georgia, students in the hallways, many not wearing masks, little social distancing, it went all over social media. And now we've learned that 9 students and staff have already tested positive in that school alone. Do those images concern you? And should all students in this country be wearing masks?
You know, I'm one, and I've said it for so long, David, that I really do believe and it's part of what I call a comprehensive way to really avoid the things that you were just referring to. There should be universal wearing of masks. There should be, to the extent possible, social distancing, avoiding crowds. Outdoors always better than indoors, and be in a situation where you continually have the capability of washing your hands and cleaning up with sanitizers. When I see sites like that, it is disturbing to me.
So when you hear this local guidance coming from some schools that mask wearing will be voluntary for students in those schools, you disagree with that? You say universal mask wearing.
You see, the issue is that, it's going to be decided at the local level. I could give you my opinion.
Right, you just said universal wearing of masks.
Right. I feel that universal wearing of masks is one of 5 or 6 things that are very important in preventing the upsurge of infection and in turning around the infections that we are seeing surging.
Dr. Fauci, I know for a long time there's been real concern about the fall and the potential second wave of all this when we have COVID combined with flu season. You've sounded optimistic in recent days, saying Americans in some way might be able to blunt the flu season with social distancing and masks. But we also heard what the head of the CDC, Robert Redfield, said not so long ago. He said, I do think that the fall and winter of 2020 and 2021 are going to be probably the most difficult times that we see in American public health. That sounds a lot different from the optimism from you in recent days. So give us a bit of a reality check here. What should we expect?
Sure. Well, David, thank you for putting it into that context, because those two things are not incompatible. If we do not do the things in a uniform way that I'm talking about, I totally agree with Dr. Redfield that as we get into the winter and fall, with the likelihood that we'd have a convergence of 2 respiratory diseases, we could have a very difficult time. What I'm saying is that I want to impress upon the American people in a way that's so clear. There are things that we can do that would get the level down. If we go into the fall and the winter, David, with the same situation that we're seeing now, as Dr. Birx described, where you have upticks of % positive, and then you have the inevitable surging of infection.
You have said in order to get this outbreak under control, we've got to get to below 10,000 cases here in the U.S. by the fall. That's just a few weeks from now, and you don't need me to tell you, we're still seeing 50, 60, 70,000 cases a day. So is that goal even attainable in the U.S., 10,000 cases?
I believe that if people, and you're right, human nature, the way human nature is acting out there, it doesn't seem likely. But that doesn't mean it can't be done, because where it has been done, David, it's worked.
Dr. Fauci, you know, whenever we get together here, I always ask you about testing. We're more than 6 months into this pandemic. People still waiting for hours to get tested, then waiting for days for results. So when are we going to get rapid testing for all Americans? I know in the UK, there are reports the government there set to roll out millions of 90-minute rapid tests this week. President Trump just this weekend said we've also been able to send out many more of the tests, which are 5-minute to 10-minute results tests, he said. So where are these tests the president speaks of? Where do you get them? How widely available are they?
Well, I hope they're going to be widely available soon, but we want to make sure people understand the difference is that if we can have screening with those tests and leave the burden of the very accurate tests to be able to do the identification, isolation, and contact tracing, those are 2 separate tracks and 2 separate pathways. And I think we can do both of them.
But they're not widely available yet.
No, it's not.
The president's also talked about a vaccine by year's end, by November. He has said it several points along the way. It's really important for folks watching at home for you to give us the bottom line here. Even if we have a vaccine by year's end, what are we looking at with efficacy? What should we be prepared for?
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the good news of things, is that if you look at the now at least half a dozen vaccines that we are directly involved with, a couple of them have already, last week or a week and a half ago, gone into a phase 3 trial, which means you're determining if it is effective as well as additional safety. The initial preliminary work on that in phase 1 trial, David, had me to be cautiously optimistic. I believe there's quite a good chance that we will, and that should take probably by the end of this calendar year with vaccine available as we go into 2021.
going into next year. Just how effective, though, Dr. Fauci, do you think, any one of these vaccines that are showing promise right now could be? What's the sort of reality we should be prepared for, though, when it comes to efficacy?
Well, the statistical analysis you'd like to show and be able to prove a 50 to 60% effective. I'm hoping that we can do even better than that. I'd like to see 70, 75% or more.
I have no interest, as you know, pitting you against the president, but I have to ask you about messaging for the American people, which is part of your job. The president said again in recent days, over the weekend, in fact, he said that this pandemic is disappearing. It's going to disappear. You're the nation's top infectious disease expert in this pandemic. Are you comfortable with those words, this is disappearing?
Well, they would have to be in addition to that. We could get it to be under control if we do the things that we're talking about. It's not going to spontaneously, by its own devices. We're going to have to act with public health effort. That's the way you get it. I believe it's achievable to get to a level that's quite controlled so that we can open up the country and get the economy back.
But at 50, 60, 70,000 cases a day, it's not disappearing at the moment.
No, it's not. All you've got to do is look at the data, David. The virus is telling us what it can and will do if we don't confront it properly.
Dr. Fauci with us here late this afternoon on what he believes we still must do as we head into the fall to try to get this pandemic under control. And on universal masks in schools, even though he believes that should be the way, he also made it clear that that decision is up to the states and local school districts.
When we probably will be, and we don't want people tariffing us, and if they tariff us, although I must tell you I have a very good relationship with President Bolsonaro. He's great, and I hear he's doing well. He's recovered from having COVID-19, as they say, and that's great, and send him my regards. I think that as far as Brazil's concerned, if they do tariffs, we have to have an equalization. We're going to be presenting something having to do with tariffs and fairness and tariffs, because we have many countries for many years that have been charging us tariffs to do business, and we don't charge them. And it's called reciprocity. It's called reciprocal tariffs. And you may be seeing something on that very soon. Did you have one, OAN? OAN, please. You may be seeing something on that very soon. Did you have one, OAN? OAN, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, thank you for coming back to finish the briefing.
Thank you very much.
After the scuffle. So I have an opinion question for you.
Okay.
Joe Biden is set to announce his running mate at any time now. We expect him to announce her. Many of your supporters feel that the reason that Obama's former NSA, Susan Rice, is at the top of Biden's list is that she can best cover up a lot of the Obamagate surveillance crimes that have taken place during your campaign. What are your thoughts? What is your opinion? Do you subscribe to that line of thought? How do you feel about it?
Well, look, the Obama campaign spied on our campaign, and they've been caught, all right? And now let's see what happens to them. But they have been caught. They've been caught red-handed. It's probably treason. It's a horrible thing they did. It probably never happened before. At least nobody got caught doing it. But they used the intelligence agencies of our country to spy on my campaign, and they have been caught. And there are a lot of people involved. I don't want to say how much she's involved. Frankly, if he chooses her, that's fine, but that's a potential liability. We'll see. But President Obama knew about it. Joe Biden knew about it. Comey knew about it. Brennan, Clapper, the whole group, they all knew about it. Lisa Page and her lover Strzok, they all knew about it. And we have it documented. We have it in texts. We have it in all sorts of forms. They knew about it. It was a terrible thing. Should have never happened and should never be allowed to happen again to a president. This should never happen again. This was a setup like we've never seen. I think it's a political crime of the century. And they've been caught. So let's see what happens to them all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
We have been listening to a press conference by President Trump at the White House. Unusual for the reasons we reported earlier, that he was briefly escorted out by Secret Service, then brought back where he finished the press conference. Reports of an officer-involved shooting. Our reporters here have still been gathering more information than that, working their sources, but we don't have as much information as the...
Now, a short time later, Fox confirmed that there was a shooting outside the White House property. You're looking live at the corner of 17th and Pennsylvania right now where that happened. As we were getting details about that shooting and exactly what happened, later told a Secret Service officer was involved in that shooting, expecting more details from the Secret Service. As we were getting more details, then President Trump walked back into the briefing room and he took questions about what happened. He said the Secret Service would brief later. He was told he could continue what he wanted to do, and that was this news conference about topics he's been talking a lot about, his concerns about mail-in voting, the executive orders he signed over the week.
It appears that the Secret Service agent simply said, step outside. Sir, we're just going to have to step outside. The president was then gone from the briefing room for about 8.5 minutes. He was not taken, though, to the bunker as he was when there were protests at Lafayette Park. I asked the president that directly after he came back into the briefing room. He said, no, we were just taken just out to the Oval Office. That is what the president said. The president also provided some details, at least what he was able to convey in the immediacy of the shooting, saying that there was a shooting, that it appears that the person was shot by the Secret Service, that the suspect appeared to have been armed, but the president insisting that the situation was very well under control.
Society and, of course, the abundance of firearms in American society.
All fair points, and the Secret Service operate as something of the mood music, the background, the presence in the White House. Whether you're a reporter and you go there, you see them, you defer to them, but rarely do you see them intercede like this, particularly inside that sanctum. What struck you about that? And I would note, observing, the president was fairly calm in leaving and returning.
President Trump did seem calm as he went out. He seemed, when he returned, he seemed almost overcome, almost sedated, like that something had happened. He was reading his notes. It sort of subdued his personality. We don't know whether it would be because of this, or whether because he had gotten so many bad responses to the announcement of his toothless executive actions that he now wanted to drive home that he really maybe had done something for the country.
David, this is shorter than usual because I'm going to turn to Congressman Schiff. I appreciate
this also. I think it's probably pretty unusual, but very, very professional people that do a fantastic job, as you know. So it seems to be, from what I was said, there was a shooting. It was law enforcement shot someone, seems to be the suspect, and the suspect is now on the way to the hospital. I can't tell you the condition of the suspect. There was nobody else injured. There was no other law enforcement injured.
The president had only been out of the briefing room for a short time, waiting near the Oval Office. He told the Secret Service, Brett, he wanted to come back in. I think he wanted to show that the shooting wasn't going to distract him from what he was doing here. Brett? John Roberts, an interesting day, Monday, at the White House. John, thank you, as always, for that reporting. The president obviously talking about the coronavirus, the situation. We had a packed show with all kinds of information tonight, but this briefing and the events leading up to it obviously took precedent as the news in D.C. changes on the minute, and we bring it to you here on Fox News Channel. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. Very interesting.
A lot of this is preventable. We just are not paying attention to what.
10, which includes Ohio State and Michigan, is now set to vote on whether they will play. The Mid-American Conference already calling this year off. At the same time, star Clemson quarterback Trevor Lawrence among the players leading a social media movement to, in fact, play. When we come back tonight, what we now know about that moment, President Trump was asked to leave the briefing room by the Secret Service in a moment.
Tomorrow, showers and thunderstorms will be redeveloping yet again in west central South Dakota, and then they'll be making their way southeast going into Tuesday night and early Wednesday morning. Yet again, that'll be about 3 mornings in a row of those early wake-up thunderstorms for some of us. And we have
They acted very swiftly within their rules of engagement on the street. Internally on the White House complex, the supervisor that was in charge of the president at that moment, that's an individual that I had worked with in the past, both in New York and on the detail, one of the best agents possible to have standing next to the president in a moment of crisis. Everyone did exactly what they were trained to do. The president was never in any harm, and to ensure that, he was moved to a safe location. The uniformed division officers that were on the street put the threat down and also maintained public safety. I mean, if you think about how congested that area of Washington, D.C. is, to be able to engage in a gunfight when there is a threat presented and not harm the public, that speaks to the training of that uniformed division officer at that moment in time.
All right, and Jonathan Wackrow, our hats off to the Secret Service there for bringing that situation under control. Tough jobs that they have down there, keeping the White House and the ground safe. Indeed, it does appear that to be the case. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I want to bring in Gloria Borger to talk about the substance of that briefing that we just heard from the president a few
effort recently. We don't know whether that is a Russian-directed effort or it emanates from elsewhere, but very similar in kind to what the Russians were doing in 2016. In terms of the hacking and dumping operation we saw in 2016, we do know that there are obviously these conversations, these tapes of Biden that are being pushed out from Ukraine. And, you know, there is obviously an identification of Derek Koch in that statement by the intelligence community as one of these players.
The deep fakes you've warned about?
Well, you know, we don't know yet in terms of the authenticity of these edited recordings. Okay. The deep fakes that I'm more concerned about is they may create completely fictitious audio or video of Biden and push that out. There were already,
or any politician, potentially.
Or any. I mean, you know, there are, you know, again, circulated, manipulated videos of Speaker Pelosi that social media companies are refusing to take down, some of them anyway. So those are concerns, but I think my top concern right now is the president, as you saw, immediately pivoted to absentee ballots. Started out there, pivoted to it when he got the Russian question.
I want to get in only because I have 60 seconds to Joy Reid. On this other issue Americans are facing, the president says he's freeing up potentially hundreds of dollars. Plenty of criticism there, but do you give him any credit for going closer?
Spring and in
across the KELO region, temperatures a couple degrees below average and not very much humidity. Overnight tonight it'll be cool. Our lows the upper 50s.
And a few laughs with Dakota News Now every morning from 5 to 7. Eric Thorstensen and Vanessa Gomez have the headlines you need to know. And meteorologist Aaron Dowdnap will keep you one step ahead of the weather with your first alert forecast. Eric, Vanessa, and Aaron. Weekday mornings on Dakota News Now.
Investigate TV tackles the
Washington until this bill gets done. Congress should not be out on recess. We have work to do.
The goal of any additional legislation will be to get people back to work, help get our kids back into school, both very safely.
A big reason for the delay, Senator Rounds says, is because Democrats are unwilling to budge from their original $3.4 trillion proposal outlined in May.
Breaking news, the shooting outside the White House as we come on the air. The extraordinary moment just a short time ago. President Trump abruptly escorted out of the briefing room by Secret Service, later returning and saying someone was shot outside. The details just coming in. Also, college football on the brink. The Big Ten reportedly the first major conference ready to cancel the 2020 season as the U.S. surges past 5 million cases. More risky gatherings. A house party with 300 people, police breaking it up. The staggering new numbers as schools reopen, nearly 100,000 children testing positive in just the last 2 weeks of July. Dangerous storms on the move, hurricane-force winds, trees toppled, significant damage, where it's all headed. Joe Biden narrowing down his VP pick. Who are the finalists? Looting in Chicago after police shoot a suspect. Over 100 people arrested. Will there be more unrest? The massive explosion destroying several homes. At least one dead, others trapped. What caused it? Our NBC News exclusive inside the Wuhan lab. How it's responding to conspiracy theories that the virus originated there. and the new mask test, which performed the best and worst.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. There's late-breaking news from the White House where President Trump was abruptly escorted out of the briefing room midway through a news conference a short time ago. The White House placed in lockdown after what we soon learned from the president himself was a shooting involving the Secret Service. Our Kristen Welker was in that press conference and has late details for us.
Tonight, dramatic moments inside the White House. Just minutes into President Trump's briefing on coronavirus, the Secret Service asked him to leave the room. When he came back a short time later, the president announcing there had been a shooting outside the White House. The suspect taken to the hospital as authorities investigate.
There was a shooting. It was law enforcement shot someone, seems to be the suspect, and the suspect is now on the way to the hospital. I can't tell you the condition of the suspect. There was nobody else injured. There was no other law enforcement injured.
It comes as the president is defending his decision to sign a series of executive actions that he says will bring financial relief after talks with Democrats fell apart. But Democrats and even some Republicans are blasting the move. Nebraska's Republican Senator Ben Sasse called the actions unconstitutional slop. Today, the accused Sasse of foolishness and of going rogue. Top Democrats also taking sharp aim.
I agree with the Republican senator said it was unconstitutional slop.
The president's actions include a new weekly unemployment bonus payment of $400. That's less than the $600 people were initially receiving and that Democrats have pushed to extend since it expired last month. The directive also requires states to contribute $100 of the total amount, something Democrats say is not possible. The White House struggling to say when Americans will actually see any money. Are we talking weeks? Are we talking a month? Can you pinpoint the timeline?
I can't pinpoint a timeline other than we'll be working around the clock, and we encourage Democrats on the Hill to come back.
President Trump also announcing a suspension of payroll taxes for people making less than $100,000 a year. The deferred tax would still be owed next year unless Congress agrees to waive it. And that tax funds Social Security and Medicare. But President Trump making this pledge Sunday.
This will have zero impact on Social Security.
Now, the president, who had been escorted to the Oval Office, said that the suspect was armed, but he didn't know what kind of weapon it was. I asked the president if he was rattled by all of this. He said, of course, but he also expressed his gratitude to the Secret Service. Lester?
Yeah, a lot more drama in that news conference than anyone anticipated. All right, Kristen, thank you. Tonight, there's growing concern after another summer weekend of large gatherings and open defiance of state and local mandates. And it comes as the pandemic puts another American institution in question tonight, the college football season. Here's Miguel Almaguer.
These are among the reasons why health officials say the U.S. has now surpassed 5 million confirmed COVID cases. Another summer weekend of mass gatherings, from house parties to church services. Authorities say some are tempting fate. In Portland, Oregon, hundreds gathered to openly defy state orders on public gatherings. In Southern California, it nearly came to blows after one pastor opened his doors for a service despite the protest outside to shut it down.
God gave us these rights.
The bitter battle over crowds and the pandemic comes as the NCAA struggles over whether to punt on this year's college football season, with several outlets reporting the Big Ten Conference is moving to pass on playing. The Mid-American Conference is delaying its season until spring 2021, amid a push to get on the field with the hashtag #WeWantToPlay.
Tomorrow, the Pac-12, which includes USC, is expected to decide their future. Here in California, football practice that was scheduled to start next week won't. The state has a ban on all large public gatherings, and that includes at football stadiums.
College football is a $7 billion business, but now amid the pandemic, any shot at a true season may be a Hail Mary. While 22 states are seeing a decrease in COVID cases, there is concern sanctioned events like this motorcycle rally could become super spreaders.
haven't even seen that many people with masks on up here.
Considered the largest public gathering since the pandemic began, thousands are rolling through Sturgis, South Dakota, where masks are suggested, not required.
Just selfish, and it's unfortunate.
Tonight, the fine line between personal choice and public safety amid the pandemic. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News, Los Angeles.
I'm Sam Brock, where the first day of school has never felt so foreign under this cloud of COVID-19.
I feel still a little scary, but pretty comfortable.
Children at McClenny Elementary School are returning to new classrooms with new rules, like social distancing, regular hand washing, and staggered lunches.
They're doing everything they can to keep everything sanitized and keep the students away from each other.
Masks, while recommended here, are optional.
Walking into the school, I didn't see a lot of mask wearing. And I think that should have been something that was mandatory and not optional. And if I see or hear coughing, I know we're pulling right out. Home is where you will be.
In the last 4 weeks, there's been a 90% spike in cases among children in the U.S., where so far more than 380,000 kids have contracted the coronavirus. Of the country's 25 biggest school districts, 18 are starting the school year entirely virtual, with no in-person option on day one. But the nation's largest district, New York City, giving students the option of returning to classes.
We want to go back to school.
Deshana Barker teaches high school in New York City, where her young children also attend public elementary school.
I'm concerned about my children wearing a mask all day. I'm concerned about the protocols of the school that they attend.
Fears for the child's safety and the educators.
They're all going to have to give their condolence to somebody's mama.
Whitney Reddick is a mother and teacher from Jacksonville who penned a mock obituary, saying she returned to work, did her best to handle all the roles placed on her shoulders: educator, COVID security guard, human shield, but ultimately succumbed to the ignorance of those in power. Calls for safety from those on our classrooms' front lines. Sam Brock, NBC News, Baker County, Florida.
With evictions and housing, what the president is saying doesn't go as far as banning evictions and not financial assistance. So what is the idea behind what the president said there?
That's right. The idea behind this executive order, he signed 3 memorandums, but the executive order is specifically on evictions. And what the president directs federal agencies to do is to look into the idea of whether or not there can be some sort of relief given to the more than 110 million Americans who are renting, as well as people who have federal mortgages. And in this regard, the president has not set aside any money. So if you're someone who's renting, who's scared that you might be evicted, this right now does not stop your landlord from doing that. Instead, what this is doing is essentially studying the problem. I talked to a lot of people, especially here in Southeast DC and in Northern Virginia, where there are a lot of vulnerable people who are infected disproportionately by the virus. Those people are very scared that now that these eviction protections have lapsed, that they could be thrown out, and as of right now, they could still be thrown out unless the president puts more teeth into something else.
Wow, so another piece of this is important, getting a lot of attention, Lisa, has to do with payroll taxes. The president talking about putting them, cutting them, and basically giving people a break for the last part of the year. How would that work, and what does it really mean? I mean, would people actually see a reduction?
That's exactly the right question again. And Judy, again, it is not clear that people will see this money in their paychecks, and here's why. The payroll tax, as many people may know, is 6.2% out of most paychecks. That goes to fund Medicare and Social Security. But, you know, it's not something that we pay as individuals to the IRS. Companies collect that money essentially, and the company is responsible for forwarding that money to the IRS on behalf of employees. So the cut, first round, goes to those companies, and the companies have to decide whether they will pass it on to their employees or not. One reason they wouldn't do it, Judy, is because under the president's order here, what the president's doing, this money must be paid back unless something changes at the end of the year or soon after. So a company like Amazon, this is billions of dollars. They don't want to hand it out and then have a bill come due next year when we could still very well be in the pandemic. So the thinking is that many companies may not pass on this money, instead may hold on to it because they might just need to give it back again in a few months. So it's a complicated maneuver. And one other note, a lot of comparisons are being made to the Obama payroll tax cut. One difference with that one, Judy, is Congress actually passed replacement funds for that payroll tax cut so that Social Security and Medicare would not lose money. In this situation, there has not been the replacement funds. Instead, it is dependent on companies and essentially employees paying this money back.
So many moving parts here. And just finally, very quickly, Yamiche, I want to ask you about the fact that while this has been going on the president's part, those negotiations on the Hill, people are still looking to see if that's going to produce anything. Is it thought that what the president did is going to cause that to move forward, or what? I mean, what's the effect it's expected to have on the action on the Hill?
Well, the president was very eager to look like he was doing something for the American people because the talks stalled on Friday. The White House had a deadline for themselves to then go it alone. So the president did that over the weekend. Now it seems as though that the talks continue to be stalled. The Senate right now is not expected to be back, as Lisa and I are both reporting. The other thing is there is this feeling that now that the president is saying that this is the thing that will save everything and that will fix the problem, that there is some feeling from the White House that he has already solved this. But the White House is still looking, as well as Democrats, to make some sort of deal. The president today said that Nancy Pelosi and Senator Schumer had called him and were interested in making a deal. They, of course, said that they never called the president. So what we have here is really a stalemate, and the president saying, well, look, at least I've tried to do something here.
So much to follow. Lisa, and
apology.
Children of our own. We just
started.
I'm confident there's no need.
100%.
100%.
Yuan Zhiming is the lab's director. NBC News was granted the first independent media access. While there's some skepticism about the lab's claims, 5 leading virologists familiar with lab protocols told us it's improbable that the virus was made or escaped. The lab itself is a box within a box with airlocks and high security. Technicians in positive pressure suits were trained in France and the US. I also want to know how the virus got to the market, or Wuhan, he says. Up to now, there's no clear answer.
The China virus, the China plague, Kung flu.
Amid accusations, China's government downplayed the severity of the outbreak here. The U.S. and China have been locked in a battle over the origin of the virus.
There's evidence that it came from the laboratory.
U.S. officials have offered no credible evidence linking the virus to the lab.
It's unfortunate that we have been targeted as a scapegoat.
China faces global backlash for failing to contain the outbreak early on and for a lack of transparency as it spread. Scrutiny of the lab was fueled by a State Department cable from U.S. officials in January 2018 about safety and a shortage of trained staff. Lab officials claim U.S. diplomats visited only once in March 2018 and didn't see the high containment lab. The State Department declined to clarify.
And Lester, we've been told the World Health Organization will not be investigating the Wuhan lab as a possible source of the virus.
All right, Janice, thank you. In 60 seconds, a deadly explosion.
Diagnosed with multiple organ failure. What does he think now? He's our guest. And a high-profile Republican ready to address the Democratic convention. Former presidential candidate John Kasich is out front.
Wind gusts, some are hailstones, and you're going to see some 3-inch hail south of Gregory. Temperatures right now very pleasant. You head into the evening hours. We're in the upper 70s to the low 80s, and just look at the satellite picture. The entire upper Midwest, it's hard to find any clouds, so it's going to be a clear sky tonight, and we'll have sunshine during the day tomorrow. Here's your futurecast. After that, tomorrow by about noontime, see some thunder shower possibilities in the central part of South Dakota. To go through the nighttime hours, the evening hours, we'll see some of those moving to the east. Sioux Falls, if we're going to get anything, it's going to be toward Wednesday morning. We're not anticipating anything severe here in the eastern part of Caroline. Central South Dakota, if we get some redevelopment Wednesday afternoon, maybe a marginal risk in Pierre in the central part of the area. Overnight tonight, our lows will be in the upper 50s to around 60. It's going to... First, more chances for showers and storms. Pretty impressive earlier today. This is the last 6 hours on First Alert Live Doppler radar, showing just how impressive that line of showers and storms
continues to be at this hour. It's been going on now for over 12 hours.
It is. That safe drivers pay 40%.
It's right there.
Deal. The gun czar is, you damn right we're going to take your gun, Beto O'Rourke. This is the biggest choice election by far in our lifetime, and the consequences couldn't be bigger.
You know, and it's thank you for being here. It's so strange. You know, you and I were talking in the break about covering elections and being on convention floors and talking to people. It's just a completely different environment for so many reasons this time around.
Right.
But I want to ask you about what Bill Barr was asked there and the suggestion that this Durham report, which everybody, everywhere you go, people say, where's that report? When's that coming out? Do you think that it will be coming out prior to the election? And what do you expect? What do you think?
Well, I think in fairness for the American people, two things should happen before the election. Number one, we should know the truth about what happened in 2016 before voters go to the polls. And number two, I think there should be a debate before one vote is cast. And I know the president has invited Joe Biden, who says he's dying and can't wait to compare cognitive abilities with President Trump. I'm all for seeing that matchup sooner than later before early voting starts in 16 states, which is all before the first debate.
That's a great point, by the way.
Right.
I mean, people should have an opportunity. I keep saying this, you know, because these conventions are sort of shrinking, because the election cycle has shrunk so dramatically. The most important thing here is that people in this country get the opportunity to watch these two-man debate, and sooner rather than later, I think is a service to the country.
And
so go ahead.
in fairness, Joe says he's ready to debate.
Absolutely.
I can't wait.
So why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he?
All right, step up, Joe. I'd love to see it. As far as what Barr said, Barr is also at other times, I call him it's sort of like Hansel and Gretel. Little crumbs are being left by the Attorney General. And this is what we know. We know he said it's an investigation. It's not necessarily a report. We know that with the Inspector General report, that we know that, in fact, there have been referrals for lying, Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page. I think, again, process crimes that had pre-dawn raids for the likes of Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, and others. So you would like equal justice and application of our laws. But there's certain things that we know that are overwhelming, incontrovertible evidence, and there's no ambiguity. The media mob in this country was wrong. There never, ever was any Trump-Russia collusion. The only Russia influence that we know for certain was Hillary Clinton's bought and paid for dirty Russian dossier. Even the New York Times now refers to it as likely Russian disinformation from the beginning. But the worst part of that is, at the top of every FISA application, when they took away Carter Page's civil rights and civil liberties and constitutional rights, it says verified. We know in August of 2016 that the FBI was warned, it's not verified, that Steele has an agenda and Hillary paid for it. 2 weeks before, Kathleen Kavlak at the State Department warned Comey. Comey signed it anyway. Not only was it not verified, it was unverifiable. Then he lied to Donald Trump because he swore when he signed that first FISA warrant in October of 2016, he said, yeah, it's not verified but salacious. And then we know for certain that in January of 2017, that when the subsource of Christopher Steele was finally interviewed, he said, none of this is true. This was just a bunch of bar talk. And then we now must ask the question why subsequent renewal warrants were signed, number one. And we also know that both Rod Rosenstein, who signed the third renewal, the fourth warrant, and that Sally Yates, who signed one of the warrants, both said, knowing what they know now, they never would have signed it because the bulk of information was the dirty Russian dossier.
Remarkable.
A week that moratorium on evictions is expiring, he does it the same week that literally dozens and dozens of moratorium on water and electric shutoffs are about to expire in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, it's both cruel, but it's also stupid policy. And Ted Cruz is one of them, but so pretty much all the spineless Republicans in the Senate. None of them have stood up, and none of them have pushed McConnell to do the right thing.
Well, both McConnell and Ted Cruz happen to marry very wealthy women, so they're fine. I guess they don't have a problem with things that are going on because they're going to eat very well. Let me show you a picture. And you know, I asked the producers to pull this picture up because to me it exemplifies the attitude that we've seen toward people who are struggling. In this case, this was Melania Trump climbing into a motorcade back in June of 2018, wearing this notorious jacket that says, "I really don't care, do you?" This was after visiting a detention facility at the border where men, women, and children were being locked up and mistreated, and we now know also being subjected eventually to the threat of the coronavirus. And then you had Donald Trump doing this, I don't know what you'd call that in New Jersey, because he had a cheering section of the super rich to cheer him while he said, "Yay, I'm going to give you guys more tax cuts for capital gains and things." You serve with the congressional version of Trump. Is it just because they're rich and they just don't relate to regular people, or is it that they have some sort of ideological disdain and it seems almost hatred for the poor and the struggling?
And it's got to do with race, as you know, Joy. Well, it's all of that. I mean, there are plenty of wealthy people in the Senate that still have compassion and still want to do things. But when I hear so many of my Republican Senate colleagues mock, as Senator Cruz did, but also say, "Oh, it's terrible that we're going to give $600 a week to these unemployed workers. It's way too much money." These are people that are millionaires and decamillionaires and billionaires in the president's cabinet saying we can't do that. They're okay with big tax cuts for rich people at the country club. They're okay with bailouts for Wall Street, but $600 for a worker. There are 600,000 Ohioans that are unemployed. 600,000. We're going to take hundreds of millions of dollars out of our state, out of their pockets, because we haven't renewed the $600. So it's bad. It's terribly cruel, but it's also bad economics because there will be less purchasing power for Ohio businesses and Ohio consumers to buy products in Ohio. So it's so mean-spirited. Yeah, it might be this too, Joy. One of my favorite Lincoln quotes, he used to say, I got to get out of the White House and get my public opinion bath. And I don't think very many of my Senate colleagues, Republican colleagues, are getting out and talking to anybody. I'm not getting out personally because I'm very careful, but I'm talking to people on the phone all the time, from school board members to small business owners to presidents of the YWCA around Ohio and homeless shelters and all of that people are talking about the challenges and the poverty and the fact, one of those telling things about the pandemic is there has not been a huge increase in people falling into poverty because of that $600 a week. Wait about a month if we don't do that. It's the kind of pain that people are going to face.
Yeah, we're out of time.
So-called election duly delivered President Alexander Lukashenko yet another reality-defying victory. 80% of the vote. The man who says you have to be born to be president, not elected.
Realizing we may have to backtrack, but hopefully being in a different situation with low rates of infection and strong adherence to developing policies to minimize the risk, we can do this as safely as possible.
All right, so when we were looking at those numbers, 97,000 children testing positive in the past 2 weeks of July, we've seen that big surge. Now, we don't know how many of them will get very sick. We don't yet know their role in transmission. We know young children can have multiples of more of the virus in their noses than adults, but we don't know what that means. We have been told in one study that children the age of your daughter, 10 years old and older, can spread the virus just as effectively as adults, right? So they can both get sick and they can spread. And now you've got almost 10% of cases as children. So as you look at where this is going, what are the factors that you look at and say, okay, if this changes, I change my mind? As not just positivity in your state, right, which is now at 1%, right? I know New York City Public Schools says it goes to 3, everyone goes home. Aside from positivity, what else are you watching that would make you say, I'm changing my mind?
So it's one, how are the procedures really being implemented? Are masks feasible? Are small class size? Are distancing protocols working? Are symptom checks being done? Because you're right, we're not going to wait for testing or knowing what rates go even regionally, never mind in the state. But are we seeing more absences with even mild respiratory illness? I think it's looking at all those in conjunction with the protocols in place that are going to impact whether we need to change our decisions.
All right, well, Dr. Krylov, I appreciate your time.
Risk of that utility filing a one-call complaint, which is a legal complaint in South Dakota. So you could have the repair bill, you could have a complaint filed, and have a fine assessed by the one-call board.
You could also risk taking down your own service, the neighborhoods.
You buy is free with Casey's Rewards.
Still to come on the NewsHour, the crackdown continues as Hong Kong police arrest the leader of a pro-democracy newspaper. Alaska faces challenges on multiple fronts in its fight against the coronavirus. Our Politics Monday team break down the federal response to COVID-19 and the upcoming conventions, plus much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Of 1973, when resolutions calling for President Nixon's impeachment were introduced in the House and referred to the Judiciary Committee. Over the next several months, the committee investigated the Watergate break-in and cover-up, among other matters, using its existing investigatory authority. The committee also hired a special counsel and other attorneys to assist in these efforts. Most importantly, all of this occurred before the House approved a resolution directing the Judiciary Committee